Tonight, more controversy over the Mueller report. People from Mueller's team, they're speaking out for the first time, complaining about how the Attorney General is handling this, and now the Justice Department firing back. Then Democrats ratcheting up the pressure on the president, Republicans feeling whiplash over the president's flip-flops on both health care and the border. ABC News political director Rick Klein will join us to help sort things out. Then we will lighten things up a bit and talk a little baseball. The Nationals at Citi Field for the Mets home opener. We are there with a live report and also an update on all the teams in our viewing area. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. We'll get into those stories. Plus, we'll be talking to a top pediatrician about the spread of measles in our area and what people need to know and can do about it. Now, back to our lead story. After 2 years of total silence, people on Bob Mueller's team, they are speaking out, and they are reportedly very frustrated with Attorney General William Barr's handling of the Mueller report. The New York Times breaking the story and the Washington Post also supplementing it with basically similar lines here. Some of Mueller's investigators told associates, they report, that Attorney General William Barr failed to adequately portray the findings of their inquiry, and they were more troubling for President Trump than to this point Mr. Barr has indicated. That is according to government officials and others familiar with their simmering frustrations. I want to read another interesting part of that Times article. Quote, Mr. Barr was also wary of departing from Justice Department practice not to disclose derogatory details in closing an investigation. That according to two government officials familiar with Barr's thinking. They pointed to the decision by James Comey, the former FBI director, to harshly criticize Hillary Clinton in 2016 while announcing that he was recommending no charges in the inquiry into her email practices. Now, the Justice Department, they're defending Barr today. The department spokesperson said Barr provided the initial findings, quote, with the understanding that the report itself would be released after the redaction process and, quote, he does not believe the report should be released in serial or piecemeal fashion. Naturally, President Trump, he has not stayed quiet on this, tweeting out some of the regular complaints. The Times had no legitimate sources, he says, which would be totally illegal concerning the Mueller report. In fact, they probably had no sources at all. They are a fake newspaper who have already been forced to apologize for their incorrect and very bad reporting on me. And I subtracted the exclamation points, but you get the drift. Now, Congressman Adam Schiff, an important player here, the Democrat from California who heads up the Intelligence Committee, explains why it is important to see the entire report and not just hear snippets from Barr. Here, Adam Schiff.
All we have is Bill Barr's word for this, and of course that comes from someone who was picked for his hostility to the obstruction case.
All of this is happening just a day after House Democrats authorized subpoenas to get the entire report released. Republicans, as you'd expect, they jumped all over that.
And as far as the Attorney General's gone, he said, I'm giving you the Mueller report. I'm giving it to you, as I should under regulations. But undoubtedly, that's not enough. Undoubtedly, that doesn't make enough press releases.
This is the anatomy of sore loserdom among my Democratic colleagues on the Judiciary Committee. It's the same witch hunt, but just a different broomstick. And these Democrats are going to continue to pursue our president, even in the absence of evidence. And it seems like they just have no shame.
It's a political stunt. It's not like you're not going to get to hear from Barr. You are, I just think, in a more logical way.
Well, joining us now, former federal prosecutor Roland Riopel. And Roland, you know, we jokingly say that Mueller's like Garbo, you never hear the voice. And the 19 prosecutors, an all-star team that folks like yourselves have said are real experts in their respective fields who are part of it, they too didn't say boo. Should we, first of all, before we get to the substance of what they said, expect that, especially if there were multiple members of his prosecutorial team that spoke to the Times and cited their frustrations, that they did so probably with the blessing of Mueller? They wouldn't just go rogue here?
You know, it's hard to say, Richard. I think if the people, it would depend on who the people were that were talking to the Times. If the people that were talking to the Times were FBI agents who were kind of, you know, doing the work but not directly, you know, meeting with Mr. Mueller every day, that would be one thing. If it was someone who was very close to Mr. Mueller on the legal team and working with him every day, It's hard for me to believe that those people who would have such loyalty to Mr. Mueller would leak without some kind of nod and a wink from him. But, you know, the FBI, if it's an agent, a disgruntled agent who's angry about the way that Barr handled the report, who's kind of on the fringe of things, that person may not have gotten any signal from Barr. So it's just impossible to say because we don't know who the source is, and that'd be very interesting to know, frankly.
But the substance of their reported concerns and frustrations when you read the pieces, to me, I think it causes a bit of inevitability here. On the first front, the idea that this report can stay silent becomes less and less plausible. And also the response of Barr saying, hey, listen, I'm not looking to do this in drips and drabs. I'm going to put out this whole report with the redactions. And I know that the devil's in the details, Roland. It matters what's redacted, but nonetheless, it makes it harder and harder for him to provide a document that's half blacked out here. It looks like he's going to have to put this thing out, especially with some of the people saying you're not reporting fairly what we provided in a nearly 400-page report.
Yeah, I think that's right, Richard. You know, we're seeing the political process play itself out and the press participating in that process. And, you know, as you and I have sort of been talking about for months, it's inevitable that this report is going to get before Congress and the public in pretty significant detail. Yes, there will be some things redacted, but, and appropriately so, unless you have the proper clearance, in which case I don't see why Congress people with the right clearance, like the Gang of Eight, shouldn't see the entire report. But the substance of this is going to get out. There's going to be too much pressure for Mr. Barr to conceal it, and I don't believe that's even what he's really up to.
Now, Roland, one of the other frustrations in the reporting was that Mueller and team actually provided their own synopsis and headline report, and Barr chose to not take that, to put that out, and did his own version, which at least the team reportedly said was not reflective of their principal findings. Why wouldn't Barr take their report and put it out there and then eliminate the political concerns that were out there, since, you know, this is Mueller's, work product? He's putting out his principal findings in his own words instead of Barr translating into his.
Yeah, I think that's highly suspicious. Richard, most of these lengthy reports, this one's apparently somewhere between 300 and 400 pages, begin with a section called an executive summary, which summarizes the principal conclusions of the report and would do it in such a way that it doesn't implicate grand jury material or classified information, so that, essentially you can just tear that off the top of the report and pass that out. That's the way these things are typically written, and that seems to be the way this report was written. And yes, it is worrisome that Mr. Barr has not just passed over that executive summary to all of us, because that was written with a view toward it at least being available to every American citizen. And the fact that that part of the report at least has not been produced yet is concerning. It really is. And
Jerry Nadler, the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, today has announced that he's subpoenaing to get that synopsis, if you will, released. To that end, another big player in this, as I mentioned before, is the chair of the Intel Committee. I want to play what Mr. Schiff had to say about Mueller and the inevitability of hearing from the man directly.
I think it's inevitable Bob Mueller's going to have to testify before Congress. I would think that he will probably be needed before more than one committee. In the Intel Committee, we have a statutory requirement that the intelligence community, FBI, brief us on any significant counterintelligence or intelligence activity, and it's hard to imagine something that rises more to that level than this investigation.
You agree with that? Sooner or later, we're going to hear from Mueller?
Yeah, I think it's inevitable, Richard. It's inevitable because no matter what's disclosed, there'll be details that Congress will want to probe. And the way to begin that process is with Mr. Mueller and his team. So I think we'll hear from Mr. Mueller, and we may hear from others who worked with him as well before it's all over.
Finally, the other big development today was that you had the House Ways and Means Committee, and they want the tax returns of the president. They want to go back 6 years. What do you think they're after?
You know, I don't know specifically what they're after, but they are probably looking to see what Mr. Trump's connections to Russia and other foreign actors like Saudi Arabia are. The tax returns may be a guide to that. And it's a perfectly appropriate thing for a House committee to get tax returns that are relevant to their inquiry. And I think what we're going to see now is a kind of battle between the Treasury Secretary, who works for the executive branch, and Congress over whether Congress can actually get these tax returns according to the statute that they're acting under when the executive branch wants to withhold them. And that'll then go to our third branch of government, the courts, to make a decision as to whether these returns will have to be turned over. So we're going to see a kind of Constitution in action battle of separation of powers and how does this all work out. It's, for those of us who love the Constitution and the study of it, it'll be a very interesting thing to watch. I do think that most people who are not lawyers, though, are not going to be too absorbed by it.
Well, you know, the president always says, I'd love to put him out there, but I'm under audit. There's a lot of skepticism, including Michael Cohen, his longtime attorney, said he's not under audit. Listen, we all, including the president, enjoy the right here for some privacy as it relates to the IRS. But it would seem that would be the simplest thing if they could say, you're actually not under audit, if there was a formal statement to that effect. Is there any way we can just get that, which would seemingly clear the hurdle, at least the president laid out, that says once my audit's over, I'm happy to put him out?
Yeah, I don't know specific. I haven't had a chance to look up the specific statute that the House Ways and Means Committee is using to try to get copies of Mr. Trump's tax returns, but I suspect that statute would permit them to ask and receive an answer from the IRS to that question: is Mr. Trump under audit? And if the answer is no, they can certainly publish that, and we'll have one more lie to sharpen our fingers at Mr. Trump about. But the fact that he's a serial liar doesn't seem to be affecting his base very much. And I think this is a lie worth proving, but it's not going to make much difference in terms of the politics in the long run.
It's amazing, isn't it? I just going aside from every day, there is something where we can actually reference the Supreme Court and a precedent-setting decision or an unprecedented development that we're trying to figure out because no other prior president has gone through. It's amazing that almost every day we can come up with something like this, Roland. I'm exhausted personally, but it's amazing we get it, you know?
Yeah, and it's fascinating, Richard, to watch the Constitution kind of get pushed around and bent and battered, but it seems to be holding up pretty well. You know, remedies like impeachment are extraordinary remedies, and those old guys in the 18th century with the wigs on their heads really wanted an educated populace to make the decisions as to how the country was going to move forward through its representatives. And we saw in the last election, a lot of Republicans got thrown out because there are a lot of people that don't think the country's going the right way. And the next election will tell us, you know, if the Constitution is going to survive Mr. Trump. We'll see.
Things like separation of powers, co-equal branches, all those things they teach you in grammar school, thankfully or hopefully, we will see them hold firm. Roland, as always, I certainly appreciate it. Thank you so much for making time today.
It's great to be with you, Richard.
All right, everybody, when we come back, the latest from Capitol Hill will be joined by our friend from ABC News, political director Rick Klein. It includes a lot of Republicans upset with the president and Democrats ramping up attacks on the White House.